So as we stand Tuesday, it does look like Ohio State, Michigan State will happen, as we are joined now by Kyle Rowland from the Toledo Blade. And Kyle, we'll get into the matchup with Ohio State, Michigan State in a moment. But first, let's maybe backtrack a little bit. And the sixth game, Ohio State needs a sixth game to get in the Big Ten championship game, but they don't necessarily need the Big Ten championship game in order to keep their college football playoff hopes alive.
Yeah, I mean, there's no requirement on how many games to play or whatnot. Obviously, the more you play, the better it looks for the committee and all that kind of stuff. And winning a Big Ten championship basically just solidifies Ohio State's spot, barring a worst case scenario of Florida winning over Alabama and Clemson winning a close game over Notre Dame. Even then, maybe Ohio State gets in. But I don't know. I mean, people are so focused on them winning the Big Ten championship. I think that's important, and playing 7 games and all that stuff is important. But if for some reason they don't play this week or they don't play next week, and Ohio State's, forced to only play 6 games and they miss the Big Ten championship game, if Wisconsin or Iowa are waiting December 19th and they're ranked, top 15, top 20, that's still another quality win. So I don't think it's some disastrous impact on Ohio State's playoff chances. I do think 7-0 and Big Ten champions obviously looks a whole lot better. But I don't think a 6-game season is a killer for Ohio State.
And as you alluded to, as long as Ohio State can play December 19th, according to the Big Ten, they will play December 19th because every Big Ten team will match up with their equal number and the opposite division. So let's say Michigan State or Michigan game doesn't happen, Ohio State does not play in the Big Ten championship game, then as you alluded to, they very well could match up with a Wisconsin or an Iowa, which could be a more enticing victory for the College Football Playoff Committee than a victory over Northwestern, who because of their game against Minnesota being canceled this week, Northwestern is in the Big Ten championship game as the West champion, but that number 2 team in the West could be Wisconsin, could be Iowa, so there is still a very good possibility for Ohio State to pick up a quality win December 19th, because even if they do win against Michigan State, even if they do win against Michigan, those aren't going to be viewed as necessarily quality wins by the committee.
Yeah, and even though Northwestern beat Wisconsin, just name recognition and brand awareness. I mean, obviously Wisconsin's a bigger name than Northwestern, and Iowa as well. And Northwestern beat both of those teams, but I mean, you can give a little and maybe say, Wisconsin and Iowa are as good as Northwestern. I just don't think. I mean, a win over those schools will not hurt Ohio State. I mean, whereas a win over Northwestern maybe doesn't even help as much. I don't know if that game would be particularly close, really. And perhaps Ohio State, Wisconsin, Ohio State, Iowa wouldn't be either. But just getting to that 6 games is definitely important. I don't foresee Ohio State missing the next 2 weeks. But if they did, I think that would be, completely disastrous to their playoff chances. I don't know if a 5-0. Would Ohio State be one of the 4 best teams in the country? Probably, but it's a tough sell to put in a team like that. Some of it was, their undoing. Other maybe it wouldn't be. But I don't know. Comparing a 5-game team to Cincinnati or A&M or BYU that played 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 games, that's pretty dicey.
And the other wild card of this entire situation is, yes, right now the rule is from the Big Ten, you have to play at least 6 games in order to be eligible for the Big Ten championship game, but nothing says they can't change that rule. You look what the ACC did today. We're kind of making it a little bit easier for it to be a Clemson-Notre Dame rematch in the ACC title game. So the Big Ten, as we saw them do earlier this year, and they said there wasn't going to be a season, then there will be a season, the Big Ten could change their mind and say, no, we're going to let Ohio State play in the Big Ten championship game, even if they don't get to that 6-game threshold.
Yeah, it was interesting what the ACC did. I mean, I think it makes sense in the name of safety, whereas if the games next week don't matter of who's going to make the conference title game, maybe it makes sense to limit the exposure and travel of these teams in the conference. That said, when it comes to the Big Ten, I will be surprised if they change the 6-game rule, just because if you make it at this late stage, with Ohio State clearly in mind, it's kind of a credibility issue, I think. It just looks not great. But it also looks not great if you don't have your clear best team playing in the Big Ten championship that's unbeaten and would have already beaten Indiana, who would be playing for it. So it's not a great situation for the Big Ten all the way around. And I think that was another not very well thought out decision by them before the season. I mean, I kind of see where they were going with that. You don't want like a 4-0 team or someone being in, but if it ends up impacting Ohio State, they will definitely rue the day that decision came about.
Speaking of credibility, right now the Michigan Wolverines, they're on a pause as well because of presumptive positive cases in their football team. I personally don't find it credible, the conspiracy theory that Michigan will purposely sabotage the next couple of weeks, not play against Ohio State in order to somehow submarine Ohio State's chances or somehow try and salvage Jim Harbaugh's job by not playing. I believe Michigan wants to play these next 2 weeks just as much as Ohio State does.
No, I totally agree. I mean, it's fun to throw these conspiracy around and talk about it and, inject some more, animosity into the rivalry. But yeah, I mean, Jim Harbaugh, I mean, people can say what they want about him. He's not going to back down and not play Ohio State. From everyone I've talked to up there and what other people have reported, I mean, it's a very legitimate, abundance of caution that they're taking. And their problem doesn't sound all that serious. Only one test came back positive, the PCR test yesterday. So there's not some huge, massive outbreak. I would assume Wednesday they'll probably return to activity. Monday and Tuesday, they were all virtual. So I think they have things very well under control. It's possible you could see a cancellation this week against Maryland, just to make sure that it doesn't get out of control. And then next week will be okay. But the only way the Ohio State Michigan game is getting canceled is this is a real legit, health emergency. And the thing that I then wonder is if that happens, Ohio State would then not be eligible for the Big Ten title game. Would the Big Ten, kind of like the SEC, they wanted this Alabama LSU game to be played. Would they say December 19th, hey, Ohio State, Michigan, you're playing then? Like, you're not playing the crossover thing. Like, the Ohio State, Michigan game is our biggest property. It's our biggest money maker. It's, perhaps the best rivalry in all of sports. Like, that game needs to be played. So you're going to play December 19th.
The interesting part about that is the Big Ten championship game has been moved to a noon kickoff on December 19th. So that traditional Ohio State-Michigan noon start wouldn't be available because I can't imagine they'd put the game up against the championship game. You can't play Ohio State, Michigan prime time on December 19th in Columbus for many reasons, but that is certainly going to be an interesting topic to discuss in the coming weeks, and hopefully it's a moot point in December 12th the two teams square off. Let's talk about December 5th. Ohio State, Michigan State. Now, at this point in time, we know Ohio State had, based on the math, 150 Tier 1 people, that's the coaches and player support staff, 7.5% of that 150 tested positive. So that's roughly, I think, 17 positive tests. Outside of Ryan Day, we don't know who those positive tests are. We don't know if it is in one position group. We've been told it's not one position group, that it was a community spread. That's going to be something interesting to see exactly how many players will be held out, because with that positive test, they are held out 21 days. So there are going to be some guys who will not be able to play against Michigan State, won't be able to play against Michigan either. So that's going to be one of the big questions going forward that Ohio State's being very secretive about. They want to protect the privacy. They're asking everybody to respect that privacy. So we don't know who will be able to line up for Ohio State Saturday against Michigan State.
Yeah, when Ohio State releases its status report either Friday or Saturday before the game, it's going to be the email heard around the world. I think a lot of people are going to want to know who is on that, and it'll be interesting to see how long it is. I mean, are there going to be 25 names on it? Or are there going to be 10? Are there going to be, 5 starters? Is Justin Fields going to be on it? I mean, everyone has all these questions about what might happen. And a lot of those names, I mean, they're not going to be able to play the Michigan game either. The Big Ten title game, by math, they would be eligible. But if they tested positive last Friday, they wouldn't even be able to practice before the Big Ten championship. So there's a whole lot of things involved. I think the post-game press conference after Michigan State is going to be the most anticipated of the season, just to kind of get some more answers on this stuff. But I think that they're going to be able to go to Michigan State with a ragtag group if they need be, and can just muster out a win. it's one of those, just win by 3 points is all Ohio State, I think, would want to do, and just get the heck out of town, and then hopefully get the Michigan game in, and then go to the Big Ten championship.
You don't have to be a Jack Park or a great Ohio State historian to remember how many times Michigan State has ruined an undefeated Ohio State season. 2015, 2013, 1998, just to name 3 of those. And this is a Michigan State team that is coming off a win over Northwestern. They just handed Northwestern their first loss of the year. It's been a very up and down, a very Rocky Lombardi season, Michigan State's quarterback, for the Spartans under first-year head coach Mel Tucker. So as much as Ohio State wants to talk about the Big Ten championship game and the college football playoff, the fans certainly do. We know the team and the players are focused on Michigan State because this is a Spartan team that could be dangerous on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, I expect Ohio State to control the game and win. I don't know, maybe not by 2 touchdowns, but even with some major guys out, I think they could handle business against Michigan State. But I mean, the Michigan game, I know Michigan looks like they're not that good now or whatever, but it still at the time was a huge game. And it's obviously Michigan State's biggest game of the season. Last week, I would say, was their second biggest game of the season. So they showed up so far for their big games. And I mean, Michigan State's got a pretty depleted roster. The recruiting wasn't great at the end of D'Antonio's era. And I think Mel Tucker's just trying to I don't know, reinvigorate, what Michigan State was the, decade prior. And obviously a good way to do that would be to have a huge statement win against Ohio State. But I mean, they've been competitive lately. I just don't think they're a great, roster. And I think even with backups, Ohio State should be able to kind of control things. But I mean, keep in mind, Ohio State's, they stopped, now they're restarting. They had a lot of days without practice. I mean, they're going to be rusty. They're probably not going to look great. So I don't know. It'll be an interesting game. I mean, I think it definitely, I don't expect Ohio State to be leading, by a ton at halftime. And perhaps it'll be a nervous second half. But if Michigan State does pull it off, I mean, they would almost, they're not going to overtake Michigan for all the seasons they've spoiled, but they're going to be just right there with this, hated kind of program for Ohio State fans.
One of the interesting subplots of this game now, Mel Tucker, first-year head coach at Michigan State, as we mentioned. Larry Johnson will be the interim coach for Ohio State. So this is going to be the first time in Big Ten history we've had 2 African-American head coaches going head-to-head in a game.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to hear, what Larry Johnson says about the significance of that. If we get to talk to him beforehand or certainly afterwards. It was kind of one of the things that kind of went left unnoticed almost, or not necessarily that, but just wasn't a huge storyline because it was such a shock that Ryan Day had COVID. But Ohio State, he's the first Black head coach. He obviously didn't want it to happen under these circumstances, but it's still a great moment. And I'm sure Gene Smith is, kind of proud of it. He's been a really great getting that, the minority involvement. So yeah, it's a pretty cool storyline involved, but it's just unfortunate that the circumstances had to happen for it to happen.
All right, I want to thank Kyle Roldan from the Toledo Blade for joining us. Of course, you can read Kyle's coverage of Ohio State as well as Michigan, both online and the print editions of the Blade. Kyle, thank you.